Hello, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to our LEC breakdown video. This, of course, being for week number 7, and we have seen some absolutely crazy things so far. It was actually back, the first probably 5 weeks, it was a pretty spread out party out there. We knew G2 was our best team. We knew Vitality and Schalke were pretty much our clear top 3 teams in that order. And then in doing so in these past 2 to 3 weeks, well, everything is unraveled, and a lot like NA out there, if you take away G2 and Vitality, let's assume those are our 2 best teams going forward, most likely. G2 expected, Vitality a bit shaky at times, but still up there. Let's say there are top 2 teams, and Excel and Rogue are our bottom 2 teams, both out of playoff contention. Our middle 6 teams are all now within 1 game of each other, and it's been some crazy ways in doing so. 3-7 Fnatic back in the day, now 7-7. We also had 7-2 Schalke, now 7-7. They've lost their last 5. Alongside that, of course, G2 lost a game this past weekend, probably their sloppiest game yet. Excel and Rogue going to play the upset team to take some teams down with them. It is just all out madness right now. With only 2 weeks left, we have 6 teams competing for, you could say, 3 to 4 spots out there for playoffs, and it's been absolute madness. Let's hop into the first one, though, our first category, that being teams of the week, and the first one has to be Origen. They have looked incredible. Last weekend, though, they go 0-2, a bit surprising there after a pretty short run for those guys back into contention for playoffs, especially a lineup we first thought, when I first did predictions at least, and maybe a top half team at best, right? Maybe making playoffs in that 5th or 6th place spot, but lately, especially this past weekend, doing so in incredible fashion, taking down Splice and Vitality in what we could say relatively short games. They snowball Patrick. We will talk about him in a second for MVP players of the week because he looked incredible. This team, they take their Baron and they finish the game, a lot like Liquid over in NA, and the 2 teams they beat this past weekend speaks for itself in the fashion they did so. Origen is on the rise, or at least we hope so, and they are certainly now in playoff contention as a top 3 team over here in the LEC. Bouncing off that, I was going to give it to SK. Now let me just say these words, and you guys could say, Jake, you're completely crazy. I understand that, but G2 had by far and away their sloppiest game against SK, so I maybe was going to think about giving SK the team of the week because they took down the almighty G2 until they lost, of course, their first game to Excel, and they did so. It was a pretty terrible matchup for them, but they did take down G2, but then you look at it, and G2 looked pretty terrible, and I thought about this. G2 has on lock, of course, a playoff spot, likely to be #1 seed as well, and it makes you think. Now, these are crazy fighting words, okay? It's just assumptions, and it's definitely possible, but probably not happening. But if G2 were to pick and choose who they lose to in order for some teams to go through and other teams to not, it did seem like a pretty sloppy game that was in their hand and in their court, and they did just about everything to actually throw that game away. Now, I'm not saying they threw the game, but I'm saying it's a possibility by how sloppy they looked. They had this game on lock, and they gave it away to an SK Gaming who then takes a spot in the playoffs, if they do make it through, over a team they might not want there. It just sounded like I accused them of throwing the game. That's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm just saying I don't know. There's something to think about. They are so far in the lead in terms of the race and record-wise, forget that #1 seed. They can pick and choose a few games to lose if they want some teams to make it through and some teams not to. Let's just say they don't want Fnatic to make it through. They beat Fnatic. They want SK to make it through, and they lose a game to SK. Again, not accusing them. Let's bounce it off, though. Another team, speaking of them, ironically enough, Fnatic being our last team of the week pretty impressively. And this time around, they have proven to themselves, and I guess to us as well as viewers, they don't need Reckless to be fed all the time. Broxa will be an MVP player of this week as we bounce into our next category very shortly here. They snowball time and time again. It was Reckless these first 4 to 5 weeks, then it was Broxa. Nemesis kind of hangs on as a consistent player. These guys have proven now in the early game they can get other players ahead besides Reckless. They snowball that. They continue their dominant early game presence, and it turns into victories against some of the best teams in the league. And Fnatic is now back at 500, and they're our last best team of this week. Now, hopping into MVPs of the week, I have a very long list for all of you guys. The first of which has to be Origen's Patrick. I talked such high hopes about this guy these past 2 weekends, and this weekend he certainly showed up. He's had a great split so far, arguably one of the better players in his role, if not probably a top 3 or top 2 player doing so after this past weekend. And of this past weekend, probably his best weekend we have seen so far out of this guy. A 4-0 Draven, a 7-0 Sivir. What he did was remarkable in that Sivir game. I would argue maybe even in both games carrying Origen to their 2-0 victory, although these games were pretty dominant in the team's presence whatsoever. I think Patrick played a great role in that, and his team, of course, snowballing him ahead. You have to contribute the whole lineup to the success out there, but Patrick looked astonishingly well this past weekend. Also, Vitality maybe looking a bit shaky here and there, splitting many weekends over the past 4 or 5, but again, I would say mistaken, in for Jizuke due to health concerns, looked very good, especially on his rise. I think definitely hung in there and definitely worthy of an MVP this week. And then very lastly, speaking of Fnatic as well, Broxa this past weekend, proving his early game presence is definitely vital for them in the future as well. We've seen it time and time again. They tend to try and feed that bot lane with Reckless, but Broxa really stepping it up. I thought last weekend his pathing looked much better in terms of communication as well. Early game, he kept that up, and of course you can't really argue too much, right? When Bwipo gets a first blood, you know you're going to see a great Fnatic that weekend. You know, Bwipo has his games that he's up and down, but still a great morale player for this roster and still a very solid player. But this weekend, Broxa certainly impressed me, had a stellar weekend. And for the first of the plays of the week out there, I think the first one has to be SK managing to pull off an ace against G2. Yes, they narrowly escaped this ace, but certainly in this matchup, I would say a turning point for this game and for SK. They managed to ace G2.
This is sort of a line of scrimmage between the two teams. Perks just dodges out the hook. He jumps straight onto the back line though. Perks maybe gone a little bit too deep, but he gets onto Crown Shot and takes him out. 1-for-1 in the edge. The AD carries ball. Shutdown goes over to Whirlip. Dreams caught up in the Cataclysm. Caps still doing a lot of work on this back line, but Mickey is the next to fall. 2-for-2 trade so far. Jankos getting the chase in onto Whirlip. Pyrian's backing down towards the bottom side of this fight, so it's 2v3 up towards the top. Selfmade maybe looking for the engage. Pyrian rejoins the fight though. Whirlip there. Selfmade gets in. Wonders down. And SK turning this one around. The Void Rush used by Selfmade. Jankos dead. It's only Caps left alive. Whirlip knocks him back. Can Pyrian get the damage on Caps? Trying to trade him for 2v1. No way! No way! He can't quite do it. Whirlip shuts him down. And G2...
And usually it's Bwipo giving up first blood, or we've seen him get caught out time and time again in that early game. Whenever Bwipo, though, turns around and takes an engage, a bit of a risk. You kind of hold your chest and hope for the best. It's actually Bwipo here against Underwhelming taking the first blood.
Could see Fnatic going through this top lane.
No.
No?
While we talked about it is an option, I don't think they need to. When you have a Xayah Rakan, to me that spells the lane that you should try to play through.
Oh, Whipper just wins a 1v1 though.
And you don't need to play through a lane that's just stomping anyway.
And then very lastly, we've seen certainly a very shaky Misfits, I would say, for quite some time now, and definitely in those standings, not secure to be a playoff team out there, but their communication, or I would say maybe, we'll talk about them in a second here as well, maybe a bit of luck here, but it seemed to be their communication, their synergy around this Baron pit against Excel won them this game time and time again.
Back to the plucky underdogs. That feels real bad. That feels real bad. And that's, of course, a member that you really don't want to watch. Oh, no! What is happening? All of a sudden, now there's Cajal running for his life. Hunsummers teleported in. He's got one. Misfits have the opportunity to steal it. Teleport is now coming in from Soaz. Paranoia buys some time. Baron rather, is picked up.
Soaz is on the top. He has the Cataclysm. He's going to look for Jessica.
He's going to look for a target. That's a 3-man Cataclysm. And he manages to stay alive. The GA will bring him back up. Here comes Hunsana chasing all the way forward. Featherman is going to find one. That's another for Maxlaw. Misfits aren't done yet. They're looking for Kasing. Cajal and Jessica are running for their lives. Misfits may have just done it. They get themselves Elder. They get themselves the ace. They will get themselves the win.
And for the Underwhelming team this week, I'm going to avoid the Rogue and XL picks. We've been picking on them way too much. I'm going to keep it up with the Misfits pick. Yes, I did talk about earlier their communication, or so we thought, around the Baron pit against XL won them that game, although it would seem a string of lucky events as well. That game was certainly back and forth as I play you guys some of those clips once again. Let's listen to the string of events that actually led these guys to take this eventual victory. So first of all, mid-game, it's all Misfits. I'll give them credit where credit is due. We've seen a pretty strong mid-game Misfits all split long, so they continue that here against Excel. Then Excel take what seems to be the perfect Baron fight. They continue to focus on Sama and so on. They win edging out fights, taking picks where they can, not even full-on engages here whatsoever. They, of course, focus on him. Then just in one fight, Misfits target out Jeskla. They get, I would say, maybe even a lucky catch out here, but they utilize that to the fullest ability. They take that fight, eventually take the Baron. It was Excel, though, who had 2 Barons throughout that matchup and could not capitalize any further. So one catch out by Jeskla, you could say a lucky catch out or a misstep by Jeskla himself, and that's what ended the game there for Excel in favor of Misfits. And so still a very shaky team in terms of late game, I would say, but this time around, whether it was luck or maybe maybe some good communication, I'm really not sure what to credit to. I think Misfits got away with this one and could have definitely had once again an 0-2 weekend. Now bouncing off that, very lastly, for Underwhelming players, there's not too many players out there who I think had back-to-back back-to-back bad series so far this weekend. You guys can leave your comments down below if you think otherwise. I think Abadaga once again has to be my target so far. I've expected so much out of this guy, especially after his first 3 to 4 weekends. His first 8 matchups, I would say, you know, getting used to, of course, the LEC and the high stage itself, he did a very good job. And when he actually snowballed his leads, he looked very dominant. He got very aggressive. And over these past 3 weekends, we've seen time and time again these teams actually capitalizing on that aggression. And one thing I've also seen is we've seen many pro players out there utilize Sylas. He got bullied right away by Splice and could never get anything rolling on that Sylas. Not necessarily his fault. Splice did a great job to target him early, as well as, you know, overall pretty solid game, early game from Splice, which we rarely see. And alongside that, though, I would say getting caught out time and time again, especially against Fnatic. There was one late game. Of course, you know, at this point in time, the game was probably wrapped up, but he just made a borderline, very, not a very smart play, you know, not necessarily stupidity, but not a very smart play to engage. He gets caught out, and that pretty much seals up the game against Fnatic as well. Never getting the ball rolling, and then over aggression, missteps to actually try and pull back the lead, which actually just digs a hole even deeper for his team. And that's why this weekend Abadaga was my underwhelming player. But as always, my name is Jake. I hope you guys all enjoy the LEC Week 7 breakdown. I will, of course, be back here for week number 8 next week as we approach just 2 weekends left for a lot of these teams to make their gap and make their run for that top 6. It's going to be narrowly close. It's going to be crazy. I cannot wait to see what players can truly show up when the time requires it of them. But as always, my name is Jake. I hope you guys all enjoy. I will see you back here next week. And until then, take care.